Howard Hughes, and he had a brilliance pushed all the way to madness. On December 24th, 1905, in the city of Houston, Texas, a baby boy was born, and they named him Howard. Howard's father wasn't exactly a normal guy. He'd do just about anything if it meant making money. One day, while he was passing through some out-of-the-way spot in Houston, he noticed this black liquid bubbling up from the ground. It was 1901, and most people had no idea what oil even was. But Howard's dad knew it, and he instantly realized what he was looking at. So he rushes over to the landowner and says, "I'd like to buy a piece of this land. Is it for sale?" The guy says, "Yeah, sure. How much land are you looking for?" He says, "I want about 7 or 8 hectares in that area." And he buys the land for under $20 a hectare. A piece of land that literally has oil spilling out of it. Howard's dad's knowledge about oil back then turned him into the owner of a seriously valuable piece of land. And it finally made him drop all those useless schemes he used to chase. He set up a small oil company on that land and started selling crude oil. Back then, selling crude oil wasn't like today. You didn't need all the fancy equipment and advanced facilities. People would come by with 20-liter containers of oil, and the simple little refineries that existed would buy the crude and turn it into kerosene. In short, Howard's life started looking up, and he met a beautiful woman named Aline Gano. They got married pretty quickly, but Aline had a hidden issue, a serious obsession, especially when it came to cleanliness. Anyway, Aline got pregnant, and their first son, Howard Hughes Jr., was born. When little Howard turned 3 in 1908, it was also the time his father, Howard Sr., pulled off a major invention, one that's still used in various forms even today. Hughes invented the drill bit, a groundbreaking invention that made drilling much easier and allowed access to far more oil reserves. This seemingly small invention made the Hughes family millionaires, not just regular millionaires. Keep in mind, back in 1908, there were no billionaires yet. Someone with $100 million was among the richest people in the world. So, as it turns out, little Howard Hughes was growing up in a very wealthy family, a family that had left their days of poverty far behind. As Howard got older and started school, his teachers were always complaining. Every time they saw his parents, they'd say, "This kid is really frustrating and never listens to a word we say." Little Howard didn't care about school at all. He wouldn't do any of his assignments, not because he couldn't understand them. He was actually very smart. He just didn't care. He was so brilliant at that age that by 11 he managed to build a radio all by himself, literally from scratch. Howard's accomplishment got his picture in the Houston newspaper. It didn't take long before his picture appeared in the Houston paper again, this time for building a motorized bicycle. Keep in mind, he was still just 11 years old. In short, Howard was a strange kid. School didn't matter to him, and his father didn't push him too hard either, knowing his son's mind was already working far beyond the classroom. At 14, Howard Hughes Sr. takes his son to a boat race, a competition between teams from 2 prestigious American universities, Yale and Harvard. His father says, "I want you to win this, Howard. If you win today, I'll give you anything you want." By the end of the day, Howard wins and he goes up to his father. His father asks, "So, what do you want?" Howard says, "Give me $5. His dad chuckles. "Well, that's cheap enough," and hands him the $5. Now, what did he want the $5 for? Down the same river, there was a small seaplane giving rides to people for $5. Howard paid the $5 and climbed aboard. Seeing his son get on the plane, Howard Sr. says, "I'll pay my $5 and come along too." They both board, and the plane takes off. The moment that plane lifted off, young Howard's mind changed forever. From that second on, all his focus was on airplanes. No more bicycles, no more radios. Just planes. When they landed, Howard wasn't the same boy anymore. He thought to himself, "Flying gives humans the greatest pleasure. I have to build something that lets me fly on my own." Howard Hughes later wrote in his memoirs that the happiest hours of his life were the times he spent flying alone. But this happiness didn't last long. Just 2 years later, when Howard was 16, his mother, who had been pregnant, died during childbirth. The baby also didn't survive, and before his grief could even settle, 2 years later, when Howard was 18, his father, Howard Sr., passed away from a heart attack. Millions of dollars and a huge oil company all fell into the hands of 18-year-old Howard Hughes, a Howard Hughes who knew nothing about oil. So he quickly hired a man who knew the oil business and made him CEO of the Texaco Oil Company, a man named Noah Dietrich. Despite Howard's youth, Dietrich paid close attention and, after a few months, realized the company was running smoothly and that Howard had made the right choice. So, Howard had a fortune at his fingertips, but he wasn't interested in advancing in the oil industry, inventing, or innovating. His mind was entirely on airplanes. He decided first to learn how to fly and then fully immerse himself in aviation. Back then, there were no flight schools. You had to find someone who knew how to fly and could teach you. So Howard went down to the airport, found a guy with a plane, and made a deal. For $100, the guy would teach him to fly and let him practice on his plane. Pretty soon, Howard Hughes became a skilled pilot. It's really fascinating. Even though Howard was extremely shy, whenever he was around airplanes or with people who knew their stuff, he transformed into a mountain of confidence. You couldn't stop him. It was hard to believe this was the same shy kid. He was actually frustrated by his shyness in areas unrelated to aviation, so he decided to fix it. He went to Hollywood, walked into film studios and asked, "How much will it cost to teach me acting?" He said that if he learned acting, his shyness would disappear. After picking up some acting skills, not only did he lose his shyness, but he even starred in a movie. The film was Two Arabian Nights, or Arabian Nights, which premiered in 1927. So he learned to fly, overcame his shyness, acted in a film, but his mind was still on airplanes. He kept thinking, when will I stop messing around and get back to planes? Then he had an idea. Why not kill two birds with one stone? He'd make a movie about airplanes, so he started producing what became the first airplane-focused film, Hell's Angels. Howard's goal with the film was to popularize airplanes and get more people around the world familiar with them. He wasn't making the film for profit, he just spent money on it. In a way, his obsessive tendencies, the same kind that had paralyzed his mother, were showing up in him, though much milder. For example, if a plane in a shot was slightly tilted for just 5 seconds, he'd say, "This is garbage. Let's get the planes ready and shoot again tomorrow," even though the issue was minor and could have been easily fixed. Some days he'd suddenly stop filming altogether, saying, "The clouds look messy. This shot won't look good." In short, what was supposed to be a 15-day shoot ended up taking a whole year. The crew didn't mind, though. Howard paid them in full. They were actually happy to have a 2-week job stretch into a full year. And after a year, when the film was finally done, silent movies were already out of fashion. Microphones had been developed, and talking pictures were the new thing. Howard saw that his film was finished but silent, so he said, "Trash it. We'll shoot it again, this time with sound." The crew groaned, realizing they were signing up for another year. It was 1930, and a single dollar was a lot of money. Still, Howard spent $2 million on the film. Eventually, he sent it out for release, and it was so groundbreaking for the time that everyone said, "We have to see this." It made $4 million, covering all of Howard's 2-year expenses, and even netting him $2 million in profit. And he achieved his goal. This film introduced millions of people to airplanes, helping them understand what they were all about. Howard Hughes also proved to be a talented filmmaker. After this film, he wrote a screenplay about the life of Al Capone, who was still alive and a very famous gangster at the time. He called it Scarface. The title referred to the nickname given to Al Capone because his face was scarred from a knife. Howard Hughes made Scarface, and it was ready for release in 1932. But Hollywood refused to screen it because there was no censorship. The film was full of shootings, blood, and violence. Howard sued Hollywood, arguing that there should be freedom in America. He could make whatever film he wanted. The court ruled in his favor, and the film was released everywhere. The movie was a huge hit, and these two films sparked a revolution in Hollywood. Those who had mocked Howard for spending so much realized that big spending paid off. No one feared investing millions in a film anymore. If the film was good, the returns were massive. From that point on, the Hollywood films surpassed those from Europe and Asia. Riding the wave of his Hollywood revolution, Howard said, "Now, let's start a revolution in aviation," and returned to the aircraft industry. He immediately founded a company called Hughes Aircraft Company, with the goal of building the fastest airplane in the world. He built a plane called the H-1, which was ready after a year. The H-1 managed to fly at 566 kilometers per hour in 1935. Howard came back to his workshop and said, "We've built the fastest plane in the world. Now we want to make one that can fly around the globe in the shortest possible time." And they got to work. Howard thought, Building a plane from scratch will take too long. Let's buy a good plane and modify it for this mission. They bought one of the best planes of the time, the Lockheed 14, and started modifying it so it could fly from New York around the world and back. It could land to refuel, but speed was critical. The modified plane took off from New York and reached Paris in 16 hours, the fastest at that time. They had to refuel quickly in Paris before taking off for Moscow. After refueling in Moscow, they flew to a small airport in Siberia to refuel again. Next stops were Tokyo, then Alaska, and finally back to New York. This global flight took 3 days and 19 hours, a huge achievement for the time. Howard Hughes proved himself a true genius. By 1940, World War II had begun in Europe. The US was rapidly building weapons to sell to Europeans, but Howard also wanted to be prepared. His company was tasked with designing military planes, and he loved the work. He began designing aircraft that were ahead of their time, like planes that could float on water and take off whenever needed. He even designed a kind of submarine that could emerge from the water and fly, something that still hasn't been built. Howard was gradually approaching 40, and as he aged, his obsessive tendencies became stronger. The older he got, the more his compulsive nature took hold. Howard was a very busy man. He ran several critical companies and constantly thought about all of them. At his aviation company, he insisted on personally test flying every plane, claiming no one else could truly spot its flaws. All these responsibilities drove his stress higher. And as we know, stress fuels other problems, making his obsessive tendencies grow stronger and stronger. Fast forward to July 7, 1946. A plane called the XF-11 was ready, and Howard Hughes wanted to test it himself. He took off alone. The first 45 minutes of flight went smoothly, but suddenly the engine failed. He was an experienced pilot, so he stayed calm and tried to restart the engine. Meanwhile, the plane was steadily descending. Despite his efforts, he couldn't get it running. Unable to find a flat landing area, he aimed for a sports building, and the plane caught fire. Luckily, there were people nearby who pulled him out. Unconscious, he was rushed to the hospital. Howard suffered a concussion and neck injuries. He was discharged with severe pain in his head and neck. He was prescribed 3 types of strong painkillers: codeine, Valium, and amphetamines. Highly addictive drug, but back then they were just considered pain relief, handed out like candy. Howard was supposed to take them for a few weeks and stop, but he never did. These pills stayed with him for life, damaging both his body and mind, fueling his obsessive disorder. He washed his hands until they bled and still said, "Not clean enough." Around this time, his obsessive tendencies began to outweigh his genius, a brilliant mind turning into madness. His employees noticed it long before anyone else. He had no spouse or children to help him, and if you offered help, he would say, "Everything's fine." Why do I need help? Howard Hughes wasn't ordinary. He even had contracts with the US military. The FBI monitored him, and everyone commented on his paranoia. He was suspicious of everything. He had many girlfriends, mostly from his Hollywood days, but none could tolerate him. Eventually, they wanted to leave, adding to his isolation. His daily life became increasingly bizarre. For example, he once went to Hollywood, rented a cinema to watch movies, and stayed inside for 4 months, doing everything there. He wasn't concerned with food, surviving on water, milk, and chocolate, reluctantly. A man who washed his hands for 3 hours until they bled could now go 4 months without washing, bathing, shaving, or trimming nails. Finally, he left the cinema but didn't return home. He rented a room in a Beverly Hills hotel and reverted to his extreme obsessive routines. 3-hour-long showers, washing his hands for hours. Throughout this time, he continued taking painkillers. By the time he turned 60, pills weren't enough, so he also used morphine injections. At this time, Howard owned a major share in an airline called Trans World Airlines, TWA. It was the largest airline in the world, but its owner wasn't paying attention to what he owned. In 1966, while at his Beverly Hills hotel, someone called him asking about his TWA shares. After some negotiation over the phone, they bought his shares for $1 billion, an astronomical sum at the time. With that, Howard Hughes became the world's first billionaire. You might ask, what about other wealthy families like the Rothschilds or Wallenbergs? Keep in mind they were families. But Howard Hughes was a one-man force, like Elon Musk. There are many wealthy families, but among individuals, Elon Musk is currently the richest man. Back then, that title belonged to Howard Hughes. He took the $1 billion and went straight to Las Vegas. Don't think he went there to gamble. Despite his illnesses and issues, he was focused on money, investing in various properties across Las Vegas. He even bought a mid-sized hotel, the Desert Inn, declaring, "This hotel is just for me." He lived there alone for several years. At one point, he disappeared, and people feared he had been kidnapped. But a few days later, it turned out he had bought a hotel in London and was living there exclusively. By age 67, after 30 years on harmful pills, he could no longer walk. 3 more years passed, and his condition worsened. At 70, he wanted to return to his birthplace, Houston, Texas, to see a doctor and treat himself. He flew to Houston, landed, but passed away a few hours later from kidney failure. A sad ending for a brilliant mind. He had no spouse or children. So who inherited his fortune? He had a will. He donated $1.56 billion to charity, primarily for medical research. $470 million went to his company managers who had served him faithfully for decades. $150 million went to his cousin, a close friend. Another $156 million went to his casinos, and $150 million remained, which he bequeathed to an old gas station owner in Las Vegas named Melvin Doman. Was he a friend? No. One day, Howard's car broke down in the Las Vegas desert, and Mr. Melvin stopped to help. Seeing that the car couldn't be fixed on the spot, he towed it over 200 kilometers to Las Vegas. When they arrived, Howard asked how much he owed him. Melvin said, "Nothing, it was on my way anyway." Howard replied, "Thank you, but I'll repay you someday." That $150 million was his repayment. So, do you think Howard Hughes was truly a mad genius? That's the title history gave him. What's your take?